Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Welcome to our Ritual Night Talk for February 1st, 2022. I'm Scott Stenwick, your host for these Ritual Night events, presented under the auspices of Leaping Laughter OTO in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Before I go any further, gotta get the YouTube spiel. Like, subscribe, request notifications. That way you'll always know when we go live or when we post a video here on the Leaping Laughter YouTube channel. Tonight I am going to be continuing the discussion from last week where we got into this idea of the template using modern ritual forms like pentagrams, hexagrams, and so on, just for doing things like spirit work that you could otherwise do, using grimoire techniques, that go back as far as, at least the Renaissance. You're looking at most of the grimoires, you're talking about, late 1400s, we know for sure. Some are older and so forth, but most of the classical ones we know about come from that period. And also from that period, we have a little bit later, the early 1500s, we have Agrippa and the 3 books of occult philosophy, where a lot of our system comes from. And we're going to be going into some of that a little bit tonight as I talk about how you take these ideas and actually just go ahead and build a ritual to do something. Now, if you haven't watched last week's video, I highly recommend it. Go back and look over some of my comments about what was really going on with this modern Victorian magic and what they were trying to do. And what they were trying to do is really interesting. They were trying to build a generic system for working with all of these spirits, from the grimoires, from, the Christianized Kabbalah, from everywhere really, and put them into a generic structure that would actually work for operations. And as I said last week, that's a really big deal, and that's a really cool thing, okay? To harken back a little bit to last week, I've included a couple of links with the video. First of all, I have, again, my template link, which I included last week. I also have included a link to my Planetary Work Jupiter article, because we're going to be using a planetary Jupiter operation as kind of our example here. And what you're going to see me do here is, it's a much more stripped down ritual than what you'll see in the Planetary Work Jupiter article, but that's a way of adding some additional components to it and taking the basic structure and expanding it a little bit more. You could use that version. It's a little more suitable for group working. So, there's a little more for people to do, a little bit of back and forth, that type of thing. It includes some elements that I don't necessarily use in all of my operations, but some people like, some people find useful. What we're going to do here is we're going to just do the basic of that. So if you want to compare what I have in the video here over to what's in the Planetary Work Jupiter, the link is there. Finally, as always, I have the donation link. All donations are appreciated. No donations are too small. All donations go to support the operation of Leaping Laughter OTO here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So step 1. The first thing you need to do if you're going to do a magical operation is figure out what you want, okay? And that sounds simple, but, I do come across people who they want to do ritual, but then they have kind of a vague, ill-defined sort of intent of what they want to do. They have kind of vague, ill-defined senses of what constitutes a success. There are some kind of weird ideas about, what success has to include or entail. And all of that stuff can really be simplified in the sense of basically just like in science, okay? You've got a problem and you want to come up with a solution, okay? As Karl Popper, Philosophy of Science, scientific hypotheses start with a problem where something doesn't make sense about, some piece of data. You formulate a hypothesis, you go through the scientific method. In magic, it's similar, but it's more goal-directed in the sense of really sit down and say, all right, I'm going to do some magic, and I want to know what I want, okay? And this can be a step that takes some time and takes some thought. Because, there's the basic things that, people want, out of life. Most spells that you see people asking for are for some combination of prosperity or relationship success or, sometimes revenge, that type of thing. Those are pretty common intents that are out there. But again, thinking about it is important. You could certainly go and do magic for all sorts of things, but you want to make sure that that magic is really fulfilling your goal. It's maybe not going to be fulfilling your true will in a thelemic sense, but it should at least be kind of in line with, what your will is and what your idea about what you want your life to be is. And so if that's a spell to, bring you a partner that's in harmony with your will, if that's a spell to bring you employment that's in harmony with your will, and so forth. Harmony with your will is great in statements of intent, and we're going to actually use it in an example here. But the big thing is make sure that you're spending your energy for something that's really going to benefit you. And this is actually where some of the stuff like revenge and cursing, I think, kind of goes off the rails in a lot of just interpersonal situations. Okay, so somebody did something or said something that made you angry. Is there really a point in throwing a curse at them? I mean, when we're younger, when we're in our 20s, we get more fired up about stuff, and we're like, yeah, I'm going to get that guy, and, you throw, whatever you're going to throw. But the reality is that as you get older and as you develop as a magician, what you figure out is, so you have a limited amount of time to do magic. There's a limited amount of magic you can throw around, okay? In the sense that, there are only so many hours in the day. You have to support yourself. You have to, or you should be able to support yourself, be able to, handle stuff that comes your way, have a life that, is basically fulfilling. And if you're spending all your time cursing, what you're really doing is you are spending that energy, instead of making your life better, you're spending it to make somebody else's worse. And that's usually not very wise. There are exceptions, okay? Now, I'm not completely down on negative magic. There are exceptions in that, sometimes there's a situation where there is a problem, the problem is continuing, and it's just going to result in more and more people getting hurt. Kind of an over-the-top movie example would be, well, let's say that, there's a serial killer in your city, okay? I mean, most people aren't going to run into that, but let's say that would be an example of somebody who is out there and is killing people and is going to keep killing people. So that would be a completely justifiable thing, to my way of thinking, to throw a curse to stop that person in whatever capacity. So that would be, I think, a wise way to use cursing magic. Generally speaking, though, you're much better off protecting yourself from the negative actions of, people who are less wise than you, who might do something, and also just, conditions that you may run into in the natural world which may put your magical forces, your magical balance kind of out of sync. Which, those do exist. That's the reason there are things like uncrossing rituals, and they're so popular. It's like energy can get kind of flipped around sometimes for a whole lot of different reasons that I'm not going to go into here. But, using planets like Mars and Saturn, for example, which are associated with cursing, really, it's generally better to use them in a protective capacity, because remember, they rule curses, and so they can protect you from curses in addition to casting them. So, that little aside done. You need to think about what you want for a ritual. And generally speaking, I recommend it's something that's going to improve your life rather than, make somebody else's life worse. It could be a situation where you're in competition with someone and, the only one of you can win, and so you do a spell for you to win. In effect, from the other person's perspective, that may look like a curse in the sense that, well, you gave yourself an edge. But I'm like, well, you should always give yourself an edge. This idea that, using magic is somehow cheating, this is another one that I hear thrown around. It's like, well, I'm the one who took the time to learn magic. If they didn't, that's really not my fault. And I'm going to use, everything I have if I really want to come out on top in this situation. And I do that a lot in my life. I use magic to give myself an edge in almost everything most of the time. Because, well, why not? Yes, there's a limited amount of magic you can do. So, there are things that are not so important to, be on top of that, I'm going to go ahead and, try to get some tiny little advantage in something that benefits me a small amount. What you want to do is you want to give yourself an edge in anything that's going to have like a big return for you in terms of your life. Maybe it's not financial, it could be spiritual, it could be in terms of relationships, it could be anything. And just to make those things work out in the best possible way that is in harmony with your will. So one of those things that people generally are, living in the United States where I live, generally speaking, one of the things that people really want to have to feel successful is they want to have employment that is in harmony with their will. They want to make enough money at their job. They want to have a job that they enjoy. They want to have a job that they find is fulfilling because, well, people do work a lot in this country. And if you're going to be in a position where you're spending a lot of time working, it might as well be something that pays you well, and it might as well be something that you enjoy. It might as well be something in harmony with your will. Now, so let's say that that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to cast a spell to get me a better job. Maybe I'm unemployed, maybe I'm at a job I don't like. There's a lot of situations where this kind of a spell could be useful. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my copy of Liber 777, and I'm going to turn it to page 12. I'm not going to turn to page 1. I'm going to turn it to page 12. And the reason I'm going to turn it to page 12 is actually one of the secrets of magic that you don't see published in a lot of places. Turning to page 12 and starting there, instead of starting on page 1, is how you work out how you actually do magical operations. And what you're looking for is, this is column 45, Magical Powers, Western Mysticism. It is the middle column on page 12 in the wiser version. I'm still not up to the point where I've really mastered that AV, putting stuff into the video. So, if you have to pause it, go ahead and do that. And if you have a copy of this book, go ahead and look it up. You can also look it up online, Liber 777, Magical Powers, Western Mysticism. And I always kind of wondered why the book didn't start with this column as column 1, because it would make a lot more sense that way. But these are the powers that you're looking at. Now, what you're going to find is that the key scale, which is it's like the index number in 777, the key scales from 1 to 10 correspond to the Sephiroth of the Thelemic Kabbalah, which is basically Christian Kabbalah, which is Golden Dawn Kabbalah is esoteric Christian. That's Rosenroth Kabbalah, which is Christian. That comes off of Kircher. It goes all the way back to Pico Delamere and Dola in the late 1400s, who said, hey, the Jewish people have this thing called Kabbalah, and we should take it and start doing some work with it. And that's where our system, the Thelemic system, which is derived from the Christian system, broke off from the Jewish system in the late 1400s. And so the first 10 correspond to the Sephiroth. And the Sephiroth represent mystical visions for the most part. And so what these are is, the Sephiroth do map to the planets in our system, but they map to a much more contemplative aspect of them. So when you're working on, if you're working on a particular magical vision, like say the vision of love, you want to cultivate that in your life. What you would do is you would work with Jupiter in the Sephirothic sense, and that is key scale 4. But what we're doing is we're trying to get a job. So that's Jupiter in a practical sense. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go down the page further. And what we're going to find is that the power of acquiring political and other ascendancy is related to Jupiter. And that is key scale 21. Okay? And this is what we're going to use to get a job. Now, the reason we're going to do it this way is that jobs and employment, they fit more into kind of a political milieu than, for example, working with the sun, which is the power of acquiring wealth. You can kind of get at the effect both ways, but jobs actually have a lot to do with status and so forth, whereas acquiring wealth, that might be something like if you were in finance and trying to do arbitrage or something like that. Maybe sun would be more appropriate. But in this case, we're looking for, more regular employment kind of thing. A job working for an employer in some capacity. And so the power of political and other ascendancy, key scale 21, which is the path of Jupiter, so represented by the fortune card in the tarot, is what we're going to be working with. So we need a couple of things now. So we're going to want the angel of the path of Jupiter, and that is Sachiel. And you're going to want the god name by which you call the angel. And that is, now, that is not the Sephirothic god name. The Sephirothic god name is El. So if you're working on the vision of love, the god name you'd use would be El. But in this case, you're talking about the path of Jupiter, key scale 21. So if you go to page 3, where you have the god names in Asaya, that is what we are looking at here. Okay, and so on page 3, what you have is actually, it's the first column, it's column 5. And scroll down to key scale 21. You're going to see that the Sephiroth, 1 through 10, they all have names filled in. But then there are a few names filled in on a few of the paths, and this specifically corresponds to the planets, one of which is Jupiter. So key scale 21, the god name is Abba, Aleph, Beth, Aleph. And this is a god name from Agrippa. It's a planetary god name. And Agrippa's planetary god names are based on the scale of numbers in sacred geometry. So in Gematria, Abba, Aleph, Beth, Aleph is 1, 2, 1, so it sums to 4. And 4 is the number of Jupiter, which is also why Jupiter is attributed to Kesed, key scale 4. Now, we want to know that because we need that for our greater ritual of the hexagram. So we use the greater ritual of the hexagram for Jupiter, and what we're going to do is we would go ahead and trace the hexagram of Jupiter. So a tree of life in front of me, Jupiter, it's over here. It corresponds to your left shoulder, but if I'm looking at it, it's here. And you go clockwise from that point, and then clockwise from the other point. And you're going to vibrate the god name Abba while you're doing that. Oh, I'm sorry, no, you're going to vibrate Arita, when you're doing that. And then when you trace the symbol of Jupiter in the center, which looks kind of like a 4, then you're going to vibrate the god name Abba. And for greater hexagram, you're going to do that to all 4 quarters. So you want to know that because this is how we're tuning the space essentially to key scale 21, which is the power of acquiring political and other ascendancy. So our opening procedure is straightforward. We can go ahead and do the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, and with a magical operation like this, I like to go around the altar. So I'll trace here, and then I'll go around like this. So what I'm doing is I'm always casting across the altar. And in the center of the altar, and then the same thing with the lesser hexagram, to set up your operant field. This is the lesser invoking ritual, the hexagram. So again, you would go around and have your lesser invoking hexagram. Then you would follow that with some sort of assumption of divinity in whatever form. You can use the middle pillar. I generally use the 11-fold seal with the Thelemic god names. But this is a preliminary invocation. It's identifying your consciousness with the divine. You can even use something like the Bornless ritual, which is adapted from the Stele of Jehu for this, where you're uniting yourself with the dynamic ground of being, the bornless or headless spirit. And this is essentially designed to put you in the place of God. So you are God of this universe that you are creating. Now, there's a couple things inside this universe. So you want to set this up ahead of time. So you have a containment structure. I showed you this. That's the Sigillum de Amath from the Enochian system. You can also use the Trithemian table if you want. That from the Art of Drawing Spirits into Crystals. That's also an effective way to do it. So then on top of that, I put this. You probably don't have one of these. This is my Jupiter tablet. It's like the zodiacal tablets that you see in the elixirites. But I have a set for the planets too. These were made and consecrated through a particular magical operation where, we essentially created these as talismans to embody the power of Jupiter, treated the paper with fluid kinetics, a whole bunch of stuff that we did to make these. And you set that in the middle on your containment structure. You don't have one of those. You basically need this. Okay, and that is the character of Jupiter, and that is the sigil of Sachiel, traced onto the character of Jupiter, which you could find, these are the magic squares, the Kamiyas. You can find these in the 3 books of occult philosophy. This is the Jupiter Kamiya, it's 4x4, and it It's structured such that the numbers 1 through 16 are arranged so that all the horizontals, verticals, and diagonals add up to the same total. And so this is essentially the spirit's phone number that you're going to be calling. Some people do actually get this conflated with a talisman, and this is not a talisman. I want to be clear about that, okay? So what this is this lets you connect with the spirit, and it seems like you could just connect to this at the top level spirit. So you've got Sachiel here, but we're also going to be calling Jophiel and Hismael, who are the intelligence and spirit of Jupiter in this ritual. And their sigils don't need to be here because you call Jophiel by the name Sachiel, and you call Hismael by the name Jophiel. They follow down a hierarchy. And then once you've got all of them present in the table, you deliver your charge for what you want them to do. So this goes in your table of art. So what about talismans? Well, a talisman is an object that has an affinity for the kind of force you're working with. And you can call in a spirit to empower the talisman. It's going to hold that quality or force as long as it has an affinity. So the reason that people sometimes get confused with this is one way to do this is you can take a piece of metal and you can just draw the character of Jupiter on it. And that will work fine as a talisman. You do not need the sigil of the spirit on the talisman. The sigil of the spirit is just used to conjure the spirit. And you're going to conjure the spirit, then you're going to charge them to empower the talisman. So that's why people get it mixed up. So a lot of the time you'll see a metal talisman with just the character Jupiter on it. And that's, that is a Jupiter talisman, and it looks like that. But you don't actually need this diagram or on the talisman at all. You just need a material with some affinity. So for quite a while, a long time ago, I got a bunch of amethyst crystals. And I like doing Jupiter works. I like amethyst crystals. And I keep them in this blue square box. Blue is the color of the Sephira of Jupiter, Chesed. And so these are just amethyst crystals, little rock. And what you do is you take this and you put this in your table of art too if you want to make a talisman. And that's what we're going to go ahead and do here. I'm not going to go through and do the whole ritual, but I'm going to include this step because talismans are really cool. If you use a talisman, what you could do is you can anchor the magical effect onto this object, and the spell can continue to work without drawing off any of your ability to do subsequent magic. If you're casting and you're anchoring everything on yourself and you got like 5 spells running, what's going to happen is the total probability shift is going to be divided 5 ways between those spells. But if you anchor in a talisman, you get a little bit of reduction in power because you're using a talisman, you're not anchoring it to yourself. So that's about 80% of the probability that you could cast if you had nothing else going on. But it's independent of any other spell or operation that you cast. So once you create it, it just works. It just continues to work. So we're going to put that in the middle there. And the continual nature of how it works is one of the things where you want to think about your charge in that context. Because this isn't just a talisman. If you set up the talisman to just, get me a job. Okay, well, the talisman's going to get you a job, then it's going to be done. It's not really going to do anything else. Okay? But if you structure your charge like I do, which is like this, I say, bring the employment that is in harmony with my will, that will remain in harmony with my will. That's important because I've had jobs that are great and then they go sideways. I'm sure you have too. And which will allow me to fulfill my will. So it's a 3-way charge, okay? And the thing about it is because of its continual nature, it's like, once you have the job, the talisman is going to keep working. And that's the point of it being a permanent effect that just runs. And it's separate from your sphere of sensation. So it's not going to be drawing any of that, probability shifting ability off of you. Some systems talk about how, and even Crowley talks about dethaumaturgia, this idea that lots of spells could drain life and vitality. I don't know. I haven't found that to be the case. I mean, I practice Qigong, I do orbits, I work with the spiritual channel. It's maybe possible to mess up your energy channels if you're like grabbing and then throwing a lot of energy as opposed to flowing it. But whether or not it has any effect on your health, I think generally speaking it's not going to. But it's going to reduce your ability to cast more powerful spells. If you don't have the spell anchored on something external, like a talisman, which kind of acts like its own object with its own spiritual channel and its own source of power. Okay? So, so I've gotten through my preliminaries. I've got my Lesser Banishing Ritual, the Pentagram, Lesser Invoking Ritual, the Hexagram, and let's say it's the middle pillar that we're doing here. Like I say, I usually use the 11-fold seal. The middle pillar is maybe a little more standard across systems. And that, is set up. So that's all already part of my daily practice. One of the cool things about how I teach daily practice and I teach practical rituals is the daily practice piece is modular. You just kind of stick it on the front. So you do that, and then instead of sitting down to meditate or just doing Kabbalistic cross to conclude the practice, you go right into the practical work. And then the practical work is you've opened your field and your space. You have assumed divinity as you understand it. You have set yourself up as the god of this universe that you're working with here. You have your containment structure set up with the stuff that you're going to work with. Containment structure is always a good idea. It is true that with some kinds of spells, it doesn't matter that much. Like if I'm doing a healing spell, it's not really going to matter if I get some healing energy on me when I cast it. But if I'm casting it to heal another person, I really want all the power I'm conjuring to go to that person. And the containment structure lets you focus that. Likewise, it lets you cast negative spells if this is something that is really warranted, like I said at the beginning, without getting any of that on you, which is, I believe, is the root of ideas like the theosophical karma and the threefold law and some of these other ideas that bad stuff happens to you if you curse somebody. It's just like working with a radioactive material. It's hard to work with without getting some on you if you don't have the right kind of containment. And so if you think about it that way, always use a containment structure for your magic, even positive spells. Now, the last piece that I need to know for the greater ritual of the hexagram is I need to know the colors that I'm tracing in. And so this is a path. And what you're going to do is in Liber 777, you're going to find key scale 21 on the king scale of color. King scale is the natural color of a path. Whereas if I were working with a Sephira, the natural color would be the queen scale. And they're right next to each other in 777. So for Jupiter, the queen scale for the Sephiroth would be blue. So it's actually a Chesed box that I've got it in. It's a blue square. But the color for the king scale color for the path of Jupiter is violet. So more like a purple. And you could think of it as kind of like royal purple, I think is kind of a thing. It's like the garment of kings and stuff like that. I think that's probably where the association of purple with that comes from. And so what you're going to do is your hexagram is going to be purple. So vibrate Arita and draw a purple hexagram. And then you trace the symbol for Jupiter. I like to use the flashing color method on this. So if I'm going to do purple, I'll do a yellow for the symbol, but you can also do the symbol in purple if you want to. It doesn't have to flash. I just think it's kind of cool. So as you're drawing that symbol, then you're going to vibrate Abba, which is the god name, and that's going to be in a yellow because this over here is a violet. Now, you're going to do that to all four quarters, and we go across again. So hexagram goes like this, and so on, and then I'm going to come around the other side and do it. So we're casting across. The magical force should always go toward the containment structure, toward your table of art, while you're conjuring for the ritual. And then once you've tuned the space, then we're into basically the grimoire technique. Conjuration, charge, license to depart. In this case, I would conjure Sachiel by Abba, which is the god name I just used to tune the space, then Jophiel by Sachiel, and then Hismael by Jophiel. So working down that spiritual hierarchy. Once those spirits are all present, then what I do is I will deliver the charge. Now, there is this idea out there that you have to have like poltergeist stuff for seeing things happening in the temple or whatever for your spell to work. In my experience, that is not true at all. It helps to be good at scrying or some other form of spirit communication like mediumship to do this, because it can, if you're trying to get information, of course you want the spirit to talk to you, you need to be able to understand them. If in this case, though, what we're doing is we're just empowering a talisman. And so we don't really need to communicate much to the spirit besides what our intent is. And so that being the case, what you could do is, feel as best you can for the presence of the spirit. But realistically, they generally will show up in a few minutes, or at least these spirits will. When you're talking about like the planetary angels, intelligence of spirits, never had any trouble conjuring them. Some people report problems conjuring like some of the demons and some of the spirits out of other grimoires. I won't necessarily speak to that here. This is for this specific method. And I also will say that regardless of what you see in the temple, your test is whether or not the ritual succeeds. There's an idea out there that, oh, well, if you don't really sense the spirit, or you weren't sure about sensing the spirit, even if the thing you cast for happens, the spell still fails because you didn't see the spirit. I don't buy that at all. I think it's completely wrong. Different people have different levels of attunement in their psychic senses. That's how we perceive these spirits. They'll get better as you do magic, but you certainly can go ahead and do practical stuff, even if you're not getting anything that looks really impressive in the temple. A lot of the time I do spells, I feel a lot. So, I feel for like changes in temperature and pressure, like in the elixir rites. I'll do that for this too, because I feel better than I see for psychic stuff for whatever reason. But, work with a method that works for you. That's really what the key is. And don't go chasing after, well, I've got to see something before it'll work. It'll actually work before you start seeing stuff. At least when you're casting stuff like this and creating talismans and this type of work. So, like I said, the charge is bring me employment that's in harmony with my will. It remains in harmony with my will, allows me to fulfill my will. You maybe want to use a limitation. In this case, I'm not sure that it's necessary in this case, but a basic limitation is what you don't want the spirit to do. So, without, injury to me or my loved ones, and without damage to my property, is a good kind of general limitation to throw. And then, once you've done that, you wait a few moments for the spirit to do what they're going to do, empower this talisman to do that, and that should be in the charge. Spirit, I call on you to empower this talisman to bring me employment that is in harmony with, and so forth. You want to do it like that. All right, so then you give the license to depart, which is you can license all the spirits to depart by the God name. So all three of you, I license you to depart by the God name Abba. And then you cover over your talisman with a piece of fabric. You shroud it. I still do this. I need to do a little more testing. I'm not sure if shrouding is necessary at this point. Most of the old sources say you do it, though. It's like gives the talisman a little bit of time to kind of stew, while you're closing down the temple. And then, once I do that, I just close with the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram. And I will do that standing in place. So, like this, as opposed to going around the altar. Okay? And the reason I do it that way is, at the end of the ritual, I'm not actually trying to banish anything related to this table or this setup. What I'm doing is, I'm just trying to clear out my sphere of sensation and detach from this thing that I just created, because it's intended to be a separate, independent entity, and it has to be kind of, cut off from my consciousness. So, in a way, it's a little like the chaos magic idea of banishing by laughter. What you're doing is you are disconnecting yourself as best you can from the rite. And in this case, you're just doing it in a ceremonial way. In fact, this whole structure is a little more reminiscent of chaos magic than what you would find if you learned traditional Golden Dawn, or at least that's my understanding of it. And it's some of the books I've read. The orders might teach it differently. I'm not an initiate. I'm an OTO initiate, not a Golden Dawn initiate. So I don't want to characterize what they're doing. But according to some of the books that I've read on the Golden Dawn system, so you would follow something kind of like what I would do, except you do a banishing hexagram at the beginning, which the lesser banishing hexagram after the lesser banishing pentagram. You would do the greater invoking hexagram of the planet. You would do the conjuration charge license to depart. Then you would go and do a greater banishing hexagram of the planet, then a lesser banishing hexagram, then a lesser banishing pentagram. So it's like you're going up and then you're coming back down. This is not structured that way. This is structured, you build up, build up, build up, build up, invoke. Here's the thing, and basically now I'm just going to cast that thing off, and I'm not going to throw any banishing energy at it. I'm only going to throw the banishing at myself to separate myself from the separate thing that I've created. Okay? And I do have found that experimentally, this is a superior way to do magic, at least in terms of getting a bigger probability shift for what you want. Now, that whole process that I laid out can be adapted for any of the other planets, also the signs of the zodiac, also the elements. And the basic process is fairly modular. It fits together in a neat way, and it works in such a way that it allows you basically to jam with your magic. You know, your opening procedure, you don't need to look that up. You already know it because you've been doing it every day. You maybe have to, look up a spirit name or something like that in, text like 777, or look up a color or something. But basically, once you have this down, you can pretty much do a ritual for almost anything in this way. And, certainly the planetary ones should be fairly obvious based on what I've laid out here. There are a few differences in elemental, a few differences in zodiacal. But for the most part, this is the method. This is how I do magic. This is how I've developed it over the years. And it's a very effective way of putting all the components together in a template, a general basic structure that allows you to do practical operations, and allows you to do practical operations right away. Yes, the idea of working toward knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel is very important in the Thelemic system, but to do that, one of the things you got to do is get your life set up so it facilitates the kind of aspirations you have. And usually that involves moving some stuff around, moving jobs around, as an example that we have here. You would need a job that would give you more flexibility maybe to do some of those operations. That would, give you, more money so that you could afford to buy some of the things you need, and so on. And all of that stuff is completely legitimate. It's not black magic. It's not evil. It's not, it's not cheating. It's not any of that stuff. It's just using magic for your own benefit, and, in a way that is, you're building yourself up instead of tearing somebody else down, is basically what you're trying to do. And, you can certainly do spells for friends, build up your allies too. That's helpful as well. The correct resolution to thinking only of others and thinking only of yourself, that Star Wars thing. The correct way to view the universe is to work for the benefit of sentient beings, including yourself. So it's entirely reasonable to do magic for yourself and to benefit yourself if you don't do it in a way that, is, acting to that you're not tearing down somebody else in order to do it. And that's a pretty simple ethical test, and it's pretty straightforward in terms of the kinds of things that I believe will lead you to having the kind of magical life that, you're really going to find fulfilling, and which is really going to encourage you to keep going with the practice, as a fundamental part of your life, because that's how you get good. You do this a lot. You practice. It's just like anything. Stick to the daily work. Do the practical work, whenever you feel a need. So, I'm almost up to 40 minutes here. I'm going to stop there. That's basically through the process. This can be adapted to other things. Go ahead and, like, subscribe, request notifications. And if you feel moved to donate, the donation link is there. All donations are appreciated. None are too small. With that, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and here's wishing you a great rest of the evening. Love is the law, love under will.